Happy Easter. Happy Divine Mercy Sunday. This lectionary came about in the early 1970s, and that was as the church was still going through some adjustments in the way Mass was celebrated, and the readings and how it worked. And so they have read these readings every third year for however many years that is, since the 1970s. It wasn't until 2001 that the second Sunday of Easter became known as Divine Mercy Sunday. And so before that, again, it was just the second Sunday of Easter. St. Faustina had some visions from Jesus. She was a Polish sister, and in 2001, St. John Paul II declared this Sunday as Divine Mercy Sunday. When I entered seminary in 2007, it was still, again, a relatively new tradition, and I had never heard of it when I got to seminary. My home pastor was not as big on mercy as he was on justice, and so I just didn't focus that much on it. But it's certainly something that took me by surprise. I also, my family being Polish, had an affection for this Polish devotion. And so every year of my priesthood, and every year of my recollection of the Catholic faith, we've celebrated Divine Mercy Sunday on the second Sunday of Easter. I wonder, what was preached on the second Sunday of Easter prior to 2001? I want to kind of take a step back from Divine Mercy today to just preach on the readings for the second Sunday of Easter more than on Divine Mercy. We'll still have our Divine Mercy Holy Hour this afternoon. I put something on Facebook so people can still have an understanding of what Divine Mercy is and the devotion and everything. So I think there's still a plethora of information out there that you could consume for the specific Sunday. One of the reasons why I want to take a step back from Divine Mercy is because the first reading, Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 47, this first line here, Acts 2:42, has been in my prayer for probably the last 2 months. I've been praying with this one specific line, and so it just stands out to me. And so I want to largely focus on it. It says, they devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles, to the communal life, to the breaking of bread, and to the prayers. So they devoted themselves to these four things: teaching the apostles, the communal life, breaking of the bread, and prayers. They certainly wanted to know exactly what the teachings of the apostles, because their job was to reiterate what Jesus had been telling them for those 3 years. They necessarily had a responsibility to care for people in this communal way of life. It was illegal to be Christian at this point, and so you really had to get good support in that. And oftentimes when they had converts, they were inviting them first in the communal way of life, and then they would go through the rest of those things. The breaking the bread, the word Eucharist or Mass was a development later on, words they associated with saying Holy Mass. But originally what they would say was, we'll break bread, and that meant to say Holy Mass. And then obviously to the prayers, something that Jewish people were already known for, but not all of these people were necessarily originally Jewish. So they devoted themselves to these four things. Who were they? So again, this is Acts chapter 2. At the very beginning of Acts chapter 2, we celebrate the Feast of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit descends upon the apostles. And then towards the end, into like verse 30 or so, Peter begins to preach, and he preaches with such zeal and attentiveness that in Acts chapter 2, verse 41, right before today, 3,000 people are converted. 3,000 people are baptized. And so today, when it says they devoted themselves, right, it's that 3,000 people, after being baptized, devoted themselves to these four things. Now, when I think of preaching to 3,000 people, I'm trying to think if I've ever had a Mass with 3,000 people. I bet, I was at a parish in Champaign. I bet there was probably a Christmas Mass where there was probably 2,000 people at it, but I don't know if I've ever preached to 3,000 people. When I think of preaching to so many people, I think of kind of something like this. There's a something to stand behind with a microphone, and there's speakers, and people can hear it. That obviously is not what the first century would have been like. Which means that Peter probably could only be heard by about 100 people at a time, or so. Let's even go crazy and say 200 people. That means that though Peter was preaching with such intentionality, with such belief, that those 200 people that could hear what he was saying turned to the people behind them and said, this is what he's saying. And then those 200 people turned to the people behind them and said, all the way till 3,000 people heard it, and all 3,000 of them were converted. They were baptized. So Peter was starting it, but it continued on. Generations of getting the message down, right? One has to really say something with deep conviction to get someone else to say something also with deep conviction, to be able to go down another time with even more conviction. That's a pretty powerful homily that Peter gives. And it's so powerful that those 3,000 people who are hearing it third, fourth hand, all devote themselves to these four things: the teaching of the apostles, the communal way of life, breaking of bread, and to the prayers. It's a pretty phenomenal thing. And they do it so well that they actually go out and they're continuing to invite people into this communal way of life. And at the very end here it says, every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Right? They first, as a group, experiences, and then they went out and just started inviting people into it. It even says that they were going into people's homes, they were going to the temple area, they were going with this with deep devotion and sincerity of heart, it says. Right, so those 3,000 people continue to go out and invite more people into this communal way of life, and more people were added to being saved every day. What is the purpose of any parish? I've said this a number of times. I have no expectation anyone remember anything I say, so I'll say it again. The purpose of a parish is to nourish engaged Catholics, to inspire unengaged Catholics, and to invite everyone to Christ Church. And that purpose is fulfilled through faithful teaching, authentic worship, compassionate service, and dynamic fellowship. So the purpose of a parish is to nourish engaged Catholics, inspire unengaged, and to invite everyone into Christ Church. Right? Peter is going out and not just preaching to those who already believe what he believes, right? He's going out and preaching to everybody else and inviting them into Christ Church. Almost nobody was a part of Christ Church at that point. And 3,000 of them come into Christ Church. I think something radically is changing in the United States when it comes to Christianity, but I would say specifically for Catholicism. We see what was just a couple years ago, we saw demographics dying and people abandoning the Catholic faith. This year we actually saw a steep rise in people becoming Catholic. I'm not going to dwell on this all that long. There's a famous political commentator of the 1800s. His name is Alexis de Tocqueville. He wrote a book called Democracy in America. You might have read some of this in high school or college. And he was posed the question, what does he see as the outcome of the America experience, the America experiment? And he says either one of two things will happen. Given that there is a rise of authority, people will either reject the authority and tend towards atheism, or they'll value the authority and tend towards Catholicism. In 2026, some of the major numbers that came out, so you can find these online, I'm not making any of these up, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles brought in 8,598 new Catholics this year, which is a 139% increase from the previous year, and it has doubled since 2023. Philadelphia brought in 1,162 new Catholics, which is a 62% increase from just last year. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. brought in 1,755 new Catholics, setting a 15-year record. The Diocese of Des Moines, which is actually a smaller diocese than us in Iowa, had a 51% increase from 265 people last year to 400 people this year. The Archdiocese of Newark, New Jersey, had 1,700 new Catholics, a 30% increase. Right, so we see a number of people turning towards the church right now. It's awesome. At the University of Illinois, the Newman Center in our diocese, one of the biggest Newman centers in the whole United States, had 130 people come into the church this year. Our Easter Vigil was 2.5 hours. No one really complained. There was a few curmudgeons that probably complained under their breath. At the University of Illinois, theirs was 4 hours long. So I don't want to hear a single word about 2.5 hours. 130 young people came into the church from various backgrounds, various beliefs, various countries. And so there can be this temptation for us to say, look, we're winning. Let's just ride it out. Don't change a thing. And we'll just continue to grow until we don't. And then when we realize it, probably a decade after the decline, then we'll look at doing something. Or we can realize part of what any parish's purpose is, and that is to invite everyone into Christ's church, whether it's a good time or a bad time. The first diocese in the United States was Baltimore, Maryland. And for a while, that was all of the United States was just the Diocese of Baltimore. And as the church continued to grow, they began to make other dioceses in the United States. In 1852, they held a council of all the bishops of the United States in Baltimore. It's called the Council of Baltimore. They actually had 3 councils in 1852, one in 1852, one in 1866, and one in 1884. In 1852, they declared that every Catholic parish in the United States had to have a Catholic school attached to it. And it's crazy. At that point, you could actually deny someone, a priest could, I'm not saying any of them did, but they could have denied someone communion if their kids weren't in Catholic school. Totally different than now. The Emancipation Proclamation happened on January 1st, 1863. And all the slaves were freed in all the states. And it was ratified in the 13th Amendment on December 6th, 1865. So in 1865, everyone came to know that these people are now free and no one owns them. And in 1866, the Council of Baltimore held their second council. And at it, they asked the question, we right now have this whole group of people, largely black people, who are now free to worship however they want, much like what it was in England as we were leaving England when slavery was legal in the United States. Slaves were just kind of expected to adapt the faith of their owner. But now that is no longer the case. And so the bishops of the United States asked the question, what should we do? Should we do something to try to collect this whole demographic of people? And ultimately, the Bishop of the United States said, you can see it in the notes taken for it. They said, you know what? Things are going pretty well right now. Let's just keep riding it. They might have used different words than that, but that's what they said. That's what they meant. And so they didn't go after a whole demographic of people. And there's not a lot of black Catholics in the United States. Oddly enough, the biggest group of people that are Catholic is actually in Africa. And we have we have a very small, it's like 8% of the Catholic Church in the United States. Because we saw what was before us and we just looked over it and just kept going. We didn't invite anybody into something. Right? We didn't invite them to learn the teaching of the apostles. We didn't invite them in a communal way of life. We did not try to break bread with them, and we certainly didn't teach them prayers. I hope that we can agree that's very, very sad. We looked over an opportunity to invite some people. So right now, the church is on the incline, and we could just say, let's just write it out. Let's just look over that and just not do anything different and just see what happens. That's not what the apostles did. It's not what the church does. It's not what the purpose of a parish is. In the early 1940s, there was a middle-aged man. His name was Jan Chernowski. And he and some other middle-aged people decided they were going to try to combat the Nazis, not by making public protests, but by simply inviting young people into a relationship, into discipleship. And so they began to meet with young people and just simply teach them what the apostles taught, have a communal way of life with them, take them to Mass, and teach them how to pray. Jan, in his group, had a few of the young men actually go to seminary. One of them's name was Carol. Carol became a priest. He later became a bishop. He eventually was made a cardinal and became John Paul II in 1978. All because of Jan. He just simply invited a group. They didn't stand up and protest anything. They didn't scream at anybody. They just invited. And the Catholic Church and the whole world was changed because of Jan. Our parish is made to invite. But I think we have this tendency to just coast. Not us particularly, every Catholic church. What kind of parish do we want to be? We see what the early apostles did, what they did, the 3,000 baptized. And the Lord is asking the exact same thing of us here today. Now is not the time to coast. Now is the time to invite.